"You people always want a handout, don't you?" the landlord sneered, standing beneath the glowing available sign like it wasn't a lie. Marcus didn't flinch, didn't speak. But when the news van door slammed open and a reporter shouted, "Isn't that the soldier who saved 6 men in Fallujah?" the entire block turned to look. The worn leather of Marcus Ellison's duffel creaked faintly as he set it down beside his polished black boots. He straightened his back, smoothed his dark blazer, and scanned the narrow office space. A wall calendar featuring a kitten hung crooked beside a laminated flyer that read, "Apply today, units available," in bold, cheerful letters. A young woman behind the desk didn't look up from her screen. The rhythmic tap of her acrylic nails against the keyboard filled the silence. Marcus cleared his throat gently. "Excuse me. I'm here about the 1-bedroom on Parkwood Avenue. I saw the listing online." She finally looked up, eyes flicking to his military haircut, then to the name tag clipped to her screen. "You're Marcus Ellison?" "Yes, ma'am." He offered a respectful nod. He never said ma'am to patronize, just habit, drilled into him across 20 years of service. She blinked at him, gave a tight smile, and tapped a few keys. 1 second." She disappeared through a side door, leaving Marcus standing under the hum of fluorescent lights. A dusty plant wilted in the corner. The air was stale, like it hadn't been moved in weeks. Outside the window, the spring sun bounced off passing cars, but in here time crawled. Minutes passed. Marcus could hear murmurs from the back. Then footsteps. The door opened again, and she reappeared, now avoiding his gaze. "Sorry, that unit's already been taken," she said briskly. He tilted his head slightly, puzzled. "Oh, that's strange. It was listed as available less than an hour ago." Her smile strained. "Yes, someone must have just submitted their application." Behind her, through the glass door, the "Available, Move-in Ready" sign still hung, bold and untarnished. Marcus didn't press it. He nodded again. "Thank you." She didn't respond. As he stepped out into the afternoon sun, the weight in his chest returned, the same heaviness he'd felt at every stop since arriving in Millstone. That invisible wall, the polite deflections, the cold coded language. He glanced at his reflection in a nearby window. Neatly trimmed beard, broad shoulders, buttoned-down shirt tucked into pressed jeans. He looked like someone you could trust your kids with, like a man who'd seen battle and come out of it whole. And yet, they didn't see that. They just saw black. 2 days earlier. Marcus stepped off the Greyhound with his duffel over one shoulder and the last of his savings in his pocket. Millstone wasn't home, but it was where his sister lived, and she needed him. Diabetes had begun taking its toll, and her grown kids were busy living their own lives. Marcus had promised their mother he'd always look after Lila. That meant being close. He'd retired honorably with medals for bravery, including one for pulling his wounded squad leader out of a burning Humvee in Fallujah. But medals didn't get you housing applications approved. He'd filled out 5 forms online before the bus had even left Baltimore. Good credit. No evictions. Pension and VED benefits stable, verified income. But in person, every interaction turned slippery. Somehow the unit was just taken, or not a good fit, or really intended for students. He tried not to let it sting, tried to keep his posture upright, his voice calm, his tone pleasant. But after a while, it didn't matter how tight your salute was. A closed door was still a closed door. That evening he sat at a diner with a plate of eggs and toast growing cold in front of him. His back ached. He hadn't slept much at the cheap motel near the highway, thin walls, noisy neighbors. He rubbed his temples and pulled out his notepad. A few addresses were scribbled there, all circled. He crossed one out. Tanner Heights told me no units were open. He'd seen a woman walk in right behind him, that day, white, young, wearing leggings and a Starbucks cup in hand. She asked about availability. "Oh, we've got 2 options for you," the receptionist had chirped. Marcus had heard it, had seen it. He stared at the list in front of him. Just 2 more left. The next morning, Marcus dressed carefully. Slacks, blazer, the small enamel American flag pin on his lapel. It was the same one he wore to every Veterans Day memorial. He still believed in what it stood for, even if the people around him seemed to forget. The leasing office at Fairfield Towers was in a more polished part of town. Glass doors, paved walkways. He walked in with a printed application already filled, supporting documents clipped neatly. The receptionist, a gray-haired woman with a soft face, looked up. "Hi there," Marcus greeted with quiet confidence. "I'm applying for the 1-bedroom Unit 4B. I brought everything you'll need." Her eyes met his, then dropped to his application. She flipped through it, expression unreadable. "Are you currently employed?" "I'm retired military, full pension and VA income." "Documentation's right there." She made a small sound in her throat, then gave a nod that didn't quite reach her eyes. "Someone will be in touch." 3 days passed. No call. No email. He phoned them. "Oh, sorry, that unit's off market now." Marcus hung up before she could finish her excuse. That night he sat at a laundromat across the street from his motel, watching the dryers spin. 2 kids raced between the machines while their moms scolded them in Spanish. He stared into the whirl of colors, the hum of heat and lint and detergent washing over him. He wasn't a man who broke down easily. He'd seen soldiers breathe their last in his arms. But this slow erasure, it gnawed at something deeper. Something he couldn't shoot at, couldn't outflank. He thought of Lila, of her laugh when they were kids. He remembered the nights in Iraq when he imagined sitting on her porch, drinking sweet tea, and not worrying about sandstorms or roadside bombs. Peace had always been waiting at the other end of the war. Or so he thought. The next day, determined to try once more, Marcus arrived at another building on Walnut Street, a refurbished brownstone, with an open house sign out front. He straightened his collar, stepped through the gate, and rang the bell. A woman opened the door, looked him over for no longer than 2 seconds, and said, "We're full." Behind her, the hallway gleamed. A basket of brochures sat untouched by the door. A fresh Now leasing flyer was pinned beside the light switch. Marcus didn't argue, didn't protest. He simply turned and stepped off the stoop. But then, from across the street, a voice rang out. "Sir? Excuse me?" He turned. A young woman with a press badge around her neck jogged toward him, camera crew trailing. Her eyes widened as she got closer. "Oh, my God. You're Marcus Ellison, right? Staff Sergeant Ellison, Fallujah, 2nd Battalion?" Marcus blinked, stunned. "Yes. Who are you?" "Zoe Tanaka," she said, breathless. "We met years ago. I did a story on Iraq War veterans returning home. You're the one who dragged Sergeant Briggs from the wreckage, aren't you?" Marcus chuckled softly, rubbing the back of his neck. "I suppose I am." She stared at him, then glanced back at the building he'd just exited. Her eyes narrowed. "Did they just tell you the unit was full?" "Yep," he said, hands in his pockets. "Said they were all leased." Zoe looked back at the now leasing sign still gleaming in the window. Then she looked at him. "You mind if I asked you a few questions?" Marcus sighed. Then he nodded. Marcus sat stiffly on the park bench, unsure of what he had just agreed to. The spring breeze teased the branches overhead, scattering new leaves onto the sidewalk. Zoe sat beside him, legs crossed, a leather-bound notebook on her lap, and a pen poised between her fingers. She didn't pull out a camera right away, and he appreciated that. So she said gently, "How long have you been looking?" He took a breath. 4 weeks. "And nothing?" "Oh, there's been plenty available, just not to me." Her eyebrows lifted, but she didn't speak. She was waiting. Not prodding, just letting him guide it. Marcus leaned forward, elbows on his knees. "I've applied to 6 more apartments. Each time there's a delay, a vague excuse, or the classic, 'We went with someone else.' One landlord, Mr. Dorrance, invited me to tour a beautiful unit until he saw me in person." His tone shifted. "You know, we're really looking for tenants who fit the neighborhood." Zoe scribbled something. "Which building?" "Corner of Hadley and 19th. Brown siding, white trim." She underlined the note. "Marcus, would you let me record an interview?" He hesitated. His fingers twitched, restless. He'd spent years avoiding attention. You learn in the military to follow orders, not chase spotlights. "I'm not trying to start trouble," he said. "I just want a place to live." "I know, but that's why this matters. You're not the only one this is happening to. You might be the only one who can speak to it in a way people won't ignore." He looked at her. "Because I wore a uniform? Because you bled for this country, and now it's turning its back on you." Marcus looked away. "I didn't do it to be owed anything," he said quietly. "I did it because I believed in something. Still do. That's the hardest part." Zoe gave him space. She didn't rush in with more questions. They just sat in the sun, 2 people trying to make sense of a system too broken for excuses. Finally, he nodded. "All right," he said. "Let's talk." Zoe scheduled the recorded interview for the next morning at a quiet cafe where the owner knew her and wouldn't mind the camera crew. Marcus arrived early, again in his blazer and pin. He always wore the pin. Not for recognition, but because it reminded him of who he still was. The camera rolled. "I'm Marcus Ellison. I served in the United States Army for 22 years. I completed 3 tours in Iraq and 1 in Afghanistan. I'm retired now. I receive a military pension, via benefits, and have no criminal record or debt." Zoe leaned in off camera. "And what's been your experience trying to find housing in Millstone?" "They don't want me." He paused, his voice steady but low. "They don't say it outright, of course. They never do. But it's in the pause when I walk in. It's in the way the receptionist's smile drops when she sees my face. It's the way the unit suddenly disappears when I show up to tour it. And what do you think is the reason?" Marcus looked directly into the lens. "I think they see a black man, and they think risk. Doesn't matter what I've done, doesn't matter what I've earned. To them, I don't look like the kind of person they want in their buildings." Afterward, Zoe packed up her gear and gave Marcus a reassuring pat on the shoulder. "I'm going to start digging," she said. "I'll check public listings, compare them to leasing records, see who's really been moving in." Marcus nodded, unsure if anything would come of it. He thanked her and walked out into the cool air, his steps heavier than when he'd arrived. That night he visited his sister Lila. Her apartment was small, tucked into a noisy block with flickering streetlights and a broken intercom, but it was clean and smelled like lavender oil. She sat in her recliner, one leg propped up, blood sugar monitor on the side table. "Any luck today?" she asked, eyes hopeful. He hesitated. "Maybe." "You okay?" "I'm just tired." She reached over and took his hand. You carried me for years. Let me carry you for a while. He smiled and squeezed her hand, but in truth he didn't want to be carried. He wanted to stand again on solid ground, under his own roof. 3 days passed. Marcus sat in the motel room with the news playing softly in the background. He checked his phone. No calls, no texts. He thought about giving up and going to the VA shelter. It wasn't ideal, but it was something. Then his phone buzzed. Zoe Tanaka. I need to show you something. Meet me at Mocha House Cafe, 4 p.m. When he arrived, Zoe was already seated, laptop open, eyes lit with energy. I pulled leasing records for the past 6 months from 4 of the buildings you visited, she said. They're all publicly available. Guess what I found? He leaned in. Of the 12 new tenants across those buildings, 10 are white, 1 is Asian, and 1 is a light-skinned Latino couple. Marcus blinked. Not a single black tenant? Not one. And here's the kicker. Your application score was better than at least 5 of the accepted tenants, based on income and background. I confirmed that through an anonymous tip from a leasing agent. She turned the laptop so he could see. On the screen was a spreadsheet, color-coded and neatly organized. The data was unmistakable. This isn't about a bad fit, it's discrimination, Zoe said. And I'm going to print it. Marcus sat back slowly. He looked out the window, lips pressed tight. I want to believe it'll matter, he said finally. I really do, but I've seen a lot in my time. People don't change unless they're forced to. Zoe closed the laptop. Then let's force them. That night, she wrote. She stayed up until 2 a.m. cross-referencing documents, triple-checking her notes, choosing every word with surgical precision. This wasn't just about one man. It was about a pattern, a system, a silent gatekeeping that had gone unchecked for too long. She titled the piece, Decorated Veteran Denied a Home, the New Face of Housing Discrimination. The story opened with Marcus's voice, his medals, his quiet dignity. It told of the units just taken, the cultural fit excuse, the data Zoe had uncovered. It quoted fair housing statutes, exposed the management companies by name, and included a short video clip of Marcus saying, I fought for a country that won't rent me a home. She sent it to her editor by sunrise. By noon, it was on the homepage. Marcus wasn't prepared for the wave that followed. The piece spread fast, shared on Facebook, retweeted by veterans groups, picked up by local and national media. Reporters called. Advocacy groups reached out. His inbox filled with messages from people black, brown, and white sharing their own housing horror stories. One email stood out. From K. Williams at nacmillstone.org. Subject: We'd like to talk about legal action. Another came from an Army captain he hadn't seen in a decade. Sir, I read your story. I still remember what you did in Fallujah. If there's anything I can do to support you, just say the word. Zoe called later that evening. They're rattled, she said. The management companies are scrambling to issue statements. One claimed the data was misrepresented. Another said they have strict diversity hiring practices, but none of them are addressing the pattern. Marcus didn't know what to say. He'd spent weeks feeling unseen. Now suddenly the entire country seemed to be looking directly at him. And it wasn't over yet. The sound of his name startled him. Staff Sergeant Ellison. Marcus. It came from a young man, maybe in his mid-20s, jogging toward him outside the cafe. Marcus had come here early, hoping to enjoy a quiet cup of coffee before the world caught up. But that was a luxury he no longer had. The man stopped short, hands on his knees. I just wanted to say thank you for what you did, for your service, and for speaking up. Marcus gave a small nod, unsure how to respond. The man smiled awkwardly, like he'd just met a celebrity. My uncle was in Iraq. You vets get treated like ghosts when you come home. What you said in that video, it hit me. My mom cried watching it. Marcus gave a polite thanks and turned back toward the cafe. He hadn't asked for any of this. The quiet man who once blended into the background was now the center of attention, and the shift felt like walking into sunlight after years in the shadows, blinding, disorienting, warm, and strange. Inside the cafe, he found Zoe already seated with a half-eaten muffin and 3 devices spread out on the table. She looked up and smiled. "You're famous. I didn't ask to be." She chuckled softly. "I know. But sometimes history picks you, not the other way around." Marcus set his cap on the table. "You see the news?" Zoe turned her laptop toward him. On screen was a local morning show segment titled Millstone Housing Crisis: The Marcus Ellison Effect. A suited anchor sat beside a fair housing attorney who explained how racial steering and covert discrimination remained rampant even in liberal-leaning cities. "It's only been 24 hours, she said. "We're getting emails from New York, Chicago, D.C. The data you helped expose, it's not just Millstone. It's national." Marcus stared at the screen. His face appeared in a split window solemn, upright, still wearing that blazer with a tiny flag pin. He barely recognized himself. He turned to Zoe. "What do I do now?" "You let them listen, and you stay standing." But standing wasn't easy. By the second day, the motel front desk had begun turning away calls asking for Marcus's room. A reporter from a rival network knocked on his door before breakfast. Someone even slid a thank-you card under the door with a $50 grocery gift card inside. The kindness moved him, but also unsettled him, because behind every gesture was the same question: why did it take a war hero for people to care? On the third day, he visited Lila again. She met him at the door with arms wide open and tears in her eyes. "I saw you on the news," she said. "All these years you never asked for a thing, and now you're making history." He shook his head, embarrassed. "I just told the truth." "That's what makes it powerful," she said, drawing him in for a hug. She insisted he stay for dinner. As they sat down to plates of collard greens and cornbread, her phone buzzed. Another message. Another news request. Another stranger trying to book an interview. Marcus set down his fork. "You okay?" she asked. "I'm just," he sighed, "tired. This wasn't supposed to be my life. I thought retirement meant peace." "It still can," she said, "but maybe peace comes from making noise sometimes." Meanwhile, the backlash had begun. A landlord named Douglas Dorrance issued a statement to the press. "Mr. Ellison's accusations are false and defamatory. My company does not tolerate discrimination and follows strict federal housing guidelines." But Zoe had already unearthed 3 past complaints filed against Dorrance properties. 2 were quietly settled. 1 was dismissed for lack of evidence. She published that, too. The city council scheduled a special hearing to discuss housing inequality. A councilwoman named Regina Ford publicly praised Marcus by name. "It is unacceptable that a man who served our country with honor is being treated as if his skin color disqualifies him from housing. We must do better." Soon after, Marcus received a formal invitation to speak at the hearing. He stared at the envelope for a long time. He had faced enemy fire, watched friends die, rebuilt his life after war. But standing behind a podium and baring his soul to strangers, that felt harder. He showed up anyway. The council chamber was packed. Cameras lined the back wall. Residents filled every seat, some standing in the aisles. Marcus sat in the second row, blazer pressed, papers folded in his lap. Zoe sat a few seats behind him, giving him space. Regina Ford opened the floor. "The council recognizes Mr. Marcus Ellison, veteran, resident, citizen." He rose slowly and walked to the microphone. His hands didn't shake, but his stomach churned. "I don't come here looking for sympathy," he began. "I come here asking for accountability." He told them everything, from the first office visit to the final rejection, from the smiles that disappeared when he walked in to the words they didn't say but meant just the same. "I wore this country's uniform. I fought under its flag. I believed in what it stood for. I still do. But when I came home, I found out that uniform doesn't follow you everywhere. Not when you look like me." He paused, letting the silence settle. "I'm not special because I served. I'm not asking for a parade. I'm asking for fairness. If this can happen to me with medals, a pension, a spotless record, what's happening to those without any of that? There was a stillness in the room. Even the reporters had stopped typing. Then someone stood and clapped. Then another, and another. Within seconds, the entire chamber was on its feet. Outside, as the crowd spilled into the courtyard, Marcus stepped away for air. The night was cool and quiet. For the first time in weeks, his shoulders felt a little lighter. Zoe approached him, phone in hand. "You're going to want to see this." She handed it over. A video clip of his speech had already gone viral. Nearly 1 million views in just 4 hours. The top comment read, "I'm ashamed it took this long. Thank you, Marcus. We hear you now." But Marcus wasn't thinking about the views. He was thinking about what came next. Because behind the applause, the promises, the press attention, there was still no lease in his hand. The next morning, a knock came at his motel door. He opened it to find a man in a charcoal suit, flanked by a camera crew. "Mr. Ellison, my name is Thomas Reddick. I represent Eastgate Properties. We'd like to formally offer you one of our luxury units free of charge for the first year, as a gesture of apology and solidarity." Marcus stared at him. "You offering this to anyone else?" The man blinked. "Well, no, but under the circumstances." "Then it's not solidarity," Marcus said. "It's damage control." He shut the door. Later that afternoon, a nonprofit called Homeward Vets reached out. They specialized in helping veterans find stable housing, working with ethical landlords, and enforcing non-discrimination agreements. No media. "No gimmicks," said the caller. "Just help." Marcus took the meeting. The apartment was modest. A small complex in a quiet neighborhood. Clean, safe, sunlit. The manager, a black woman in her 60s, welcomed him like family. "We saw the news," she said. "But I'm offering this because you belong here, not because you were on TV." Marcus walked to the space. 1 bedroom, fresh paint. A patio overlooking a garden bed. It wasn't fancy, but it felt like dignity. He turned to her. "I'll take it." That night he called Lila. "I got a place," he said. She screamed with joy on the other end. "They better not mess with you again," he laughed. "They won't, and if they do, I've got an army now." Marcus moved in quietly a few days later. No press, no fanfare, just him, his duffel bag and a set of keys in his hand. As he unpacked, he found an old photograph his squad in Fallujah. Dusty uniforms, grins full of grit. He placed it on the mantel. Then he stepped out onto the patio. The sun was setting, bathing the courtyard in gold. A little girl rode by on her bike and waved. "Hi, mister." He smiled and waved back. Peace, at last, didn't mean quiet. It meant being seen. It meant being home. Marcus awoke before the sun, as he always did. Decades of military discipline didn't fade with retirement. The routine remained in his bones. He brewed coffee in his small but spotless kitchen, the hum of the new refrigerator still foreign to his ears. This apartment still felt temporary in his mind, like a favor on loan. He stepped out onto the patio as steam curled from his mug, the early spring air cool against his skin. He stared at the garden below. The grass was damp, the flowers half-bloomed. It was quiet, still, but peace always made Marcus cautious. It never stayed long. His phone buzzed on the kitchen counter. He let it ring once before checking it. Zoe. He picked it up and answered with a low warning. "Did I wake you?" "No, habit." Figured. Her voice was calm, but there was energy in it. "I didn't want to bother you this early, but something came up." Marcus leaned against the counter. "What now?" "There's a legal team working on a class action, housing discrimination. They want to name you as one of the lead plaintiffs." He exhaled slowly. "Of course they do." "You'd be the strongest voice," she said. "You've already built the momentum and people trust you." "I didn't ask for this," he said quietly. "I know, but the people who need this lawsuit, they didn't ask for discrimination either." He rubbed a hand across his face. "Let me think about it." "Of course. I'll send over the details." She hung up without pressuring him. He stood there, watching the last of the steam drift out of his mug. He didn't mind being seen, not anymore, but he wasn't sure he wanted to be held up as a banner. He wasn't sure he wanted the responsibility of everyone else's hopes stacked on top of his own fight. Later that day, he visited Lila. Her apartment was warm and filled with the smell of lavender oil and fried okra. She met him at the door, her arms already stretched for a hug. "You look better," she said, stepping aside to let him in. He shrugged, still here. They sat on her couch, the TV playing quietly in the background. She was stronger this week. New meds were helping, and the swelling in her legs had gone down. He didn't mention the lawsuit. She did. "They want you to sue them?" He looked at her. "How'd you know?" "You're on the news, Marcus. I can't change the channel without your face showing up between weather reports and political ads." He chuckled. "You think I should do it?" "I think you already know the answer." He looked at her. "I didn't start this for the spotlight." "No," she said. "You started it because you were tired of getting lied to. And now people are listening. Use it." That night, Zoe sent the documents. The legal team had been watching the case unfold from day one. Camille Jennings, the lead attorney, had a reputation for taking on impossible fights and making people listen. Marcus read her letter 3 times before closing the laptop. The next morning, he met Camille in person. Zoe arranged a meeting at her newsroom conference room. Camille was a tall, focused black woman with confident eyes and a voice that filled the space without raising volume. "We've already filed preliminary claims," she explained. "But if you're with us, we make it real. You're not just a headline. You're Exhibit A." He didn't flinch. "I don't want to be used." "We won't use you. We'll amplify you. There's a difference." She laid out internal documents they'd obtained through whistleblowers, leasing emails filled with coded language. One manager wrote, "Keep things clean and uniform, if you know what I mean." Another flagged Marcus's application with a note that simply said, "Concerned about fit? Risk factor?" Camille pointed to the lines like they were battle maps. "They never expected this to come to light. You cracked the dam. We just need to finish the breach." Marcus picked up a pen. He signed the statement at the bottom of the packet. He didn't do it for himself. He did it for the people who looked like him and were still knocking on doors that wouldn't open. The next few days moved fast. The lawsuit went public. National media picked it up again. News anchors said his name with solemn gravity. Political commentators called him brave. Detractors called him divisive. He ignored them all. His face was back on screens, sometimes with a medal beside it, sometimes with the word activist stamped across the bottom in bold. He still went to the grocery store alone. He still helped Lila carry groceries up 3 flights of stairs. He still made his bed every morning. But he wasn't just Marcus Ellison, retired staff sergeant, anymore. He was a movement, whether he wanted to be or not. He began receiving letters, some kind, some vicious. One envelope held nothing but a photo of his apartment building and the words "Stay quiet" scribbled across the bottom. Camille filed an intimidation report. Zoe showed up that night with a bag of takeout and an old bottle of ginger ale. "You okay?" she asked. Marcus nodded. "They're just trying to scare me." "Is it working?" He looked her in the eye. "No," she smiled. "Then you're already winning." The following week, he spoke at a local university's civil rights seminar. Students lined the back walls, laptops open, some standing. He wore no medals, no suit. Just a pressed shirt and his voice. "I didn't want to become a case," he told them, "but I refused to remain a statistic." He spoke about silence, about coded rejection, about being told over and over to accept less. Then a young man in the back raised his hand and asked, "How do you stay calm when everything feels stacked against you?" Marcus took a long breath. "I don't stay calm," he said. "I stay steady. That's not the same thing." Camille continued collecting evidence. One night she called Marcus, her voice electric. They deleted files. Dorrance Properties scrubbed internal communication logs right after your story dropped. We recovered fragments. What do they say? She sent him the screenshots. Black veteran flagged public optics risk. Marcus read it twice. His name was literally written in the margins. Tell the judge, he said. We will, she replied. Regina Ford reached out again. They met at a diner near City Hall. She was working on a new piece of legislation, this one aimed at expanding veterans, housing rights, and increasing penalties for discriminatory practices. She called it the Marcus Ellison Initiative. He blinked. You're naming it after me? You lit the fire, she said. The least we can do is put your name on the torch. He didn't argue. He just said, only if we make it real. We will. That same week, a man came to his door. Mid-50s, pale, nervous. He wore a ball cap and a name tag that read, Gerald. I'm the building manager for Hadley and 19th, he said, eyes darting. You came by a few weeks ago. I was the one who told you the place was taken. Marcus didn't say anything, just stared. I wanted to say I was wrong. I shouldn't have done that. I told my team to lie. I panicked. I thought neighbors would complain, but you didn't deserve that. Marcus crossed his arms. I'm not here to be forgiven, Gerald added. Just to be honest, Marcus sighed. Then start doing better. Every tenant. Every application. No more lies. I will, the man said. And he left. Marcus closed the door. He didn't feel proud, just a little more certain that the tide had finally turned. That night he opened his kitchen drawer and pulled out a frame. He placed it on the wall above his medals. Inside was a photo of him standing outside the courthouse, holding the door open for an older woman as protest signs filled the steps behind them. Someone had written across the bottom in blue ink, You opened the door, for all of us. He stared at it for a long time, then turned off the light and stood in the dark, feeling for once like he didn't have to keep explaining who he was. The moment the bill passed, Millstone changed. Not overnight. Not completely, but something shifted. The headlines faded slowly from the front page, replaced by newer scandals, celebrity breakups, and election debates. But Marcus Ellison remained in the city's bloodstream. People whispered his name like a reminder, like a warning to those who still preferred doors closed and voices silenced. At the local grocery store, he noticed the change first. A cashier, probably no older than 20, paused when he bagged Marcus's bread. Hey, he said, quietly. Thanks for what you did. My uncle's been trying to get housing for 2 years. You gave him hope. Marcus didn't know what to say. He only nodded. Outside in the parking lot, a woman waiting by her car recognized him and offered a kind smile. You remind us what dignity looks like, she said. He hadn't asked to become a symbol, and yet here he was. He still walked with purpose, shoulders square, eyes alert. But now there was something different in his posture. It wasn't just discipline, it was belonging. Zoe called that evening. I have something I think you'll want to see. What now? I'm emailing it. Seconds later, a video popped into his inbox. Marcus opened it. The screen lit up with grainy footage. It was the original clip of him being turned away from the brownstone, the woman at the door, the "We're full" lie, the sign in the background that clearly read, Now Leasing. But the clip had been remixed, stitched with his Veterans Day speech, clips of him in uniform, photos of his service, all set to a somber instrumental track. Then it cut to black and displayed a simple phrase, He defended our home. Now we defend his right to one. It was an advocacy ad, clean, powerful, and already sitting at 4.2 million views. Marcus watched the video again, then leaned back in his chair. Who made this? He asked. Zoe laughed. A group of black filmmakers in Atlanta. They saw your story and said it spoke to them. They turned it into a national campaign. It's on TikTok, Instagram, YouTube. Even ran on TV in some states during the basketball playoffs. He let out a low whistle. Just be ready, she added, because there's more coming. And there was. Marcus's story became a conversation starter at churches, universities, political debates. It fueled new housing reform bills in 2 other states. Civil rights lawyers cited his case in ongoing litigation. He had become the face of a movement, willing or not, but it wasn't just praise he received. Anonymous letters came in, some full of venom, blaming him for race baiting, for playing victim. One envelope contained nothing but a black and white photo of his apartment building with the words "Still Watching" scrawled across it. Camille urged him to relocate. "We can have you moved within the week," she said. "We'll get a private security detail, too." But Marcus refused. "I just got here. I'm not running." Camille didn't argue. She just placed a hand on his shoulder and said, "Then we stand with you." A week later, the court date for the housing discrimination case was set. It made the news again. Talk radio lit up with opinions. Some hailed Marcus as a hero. Others called him a troublemaker, claiming housing shortages affected everyone equally. He stopped listening. Instead, he focused on his routine morning coffee, walks through the park, visits to Lila. She had grown stronger lately. Her medication was working, her appetite back. During one of his visits, she pulled out an old shoebox filled with photos. "You remember this?" she asked, holding up a picture of him in basic training. He laughed. "Barely. I was 18. Thought I knew everything." "You still looked like trouble," she teased. They went through every photo. Boot camp, first deployment, their parents' anniversary, old friends, some long gone. In one picture, Marcus stood beside a group of children in Baghdad, handing out bottled water, his face soft, almost shy. "This one," she said, "this is how I think of you. Not just the soldier, but the man who always saw people." He touched the photo, feeling the weight of the years in his chest. "I don't know how much longer I can keep fighting, Lila," he admitted. "You don't have to fight alone." The night before the hearing, Zoe dropped by unannounced. She brought dinner chicken and rice from his favorite place downtown and a bottle of ginger ale. They ate on the patio as the sun dipped low. "You ready?" she asked. He didn't answer right away. "I'm not sure anyone's ever ready to explain why their humanity had to be defended." She set her fork down. "You're not alone in that courtroom, Marcus. And you won't be alone after it either. I just want to speak the truth," he said. "Then speak it." The courthouse was packed. Media vans lined the street. Protesters held signs. "Fair housing now. Veterans deserve better. We stand with Marcus." Inside, the atmosphere was thick with tension. Camille led the legal team in with precision. Marcus walked behind her, dressed sharply in a navy suit, medals left at home. He didn't want pity. He wanted respect. Inside the courtroom, the defendants sat stone-faced. Some tried to avoid looking at him. Others glared, their contempt poorly disguised. The judge entered. The hearing began. Camille opened with fire. She laid out the statistics, the patterns, the testimonies from other black renters, many of whom had never spoken up until Marcus's story gave them courage. She played the video clip from the brownstone. You could hear the hush in the courtroom when the woman lied clearly, directly, as the leasing sign shone behind her. And then it was Marcus's turn. He stepped up to the witness stand and took the oath. The room was still. "Mr. Ellison," Camille began, "why are you here today?" He looked out over the courtroom. "I'm here because I was told in more ways than one that I didn't belong. I'm here because no matter how many tours I served, how many friends I lost, how many medals I earned, some people still looked at me and saw a threat, not a tenant." His voice didn't rise. "It didn't need to. I've lived with dignity. I've carried the flag into combat. I've carried brothers home under that flag. And when I returned, I expected only the same courtesy anyone else is due. Fairness, decency, a chance." He paused. "But that wasn't what I got. I got doors shut in my face, lies told to my face, and all of it wrapped in a smile to keep things polite." He took a breath. "I didn't come here to shame anyone. I came to be heard. And I'm speaking not just for me, but for every black man and woman who's been told in 100 subtle ways that they don't deserve a place to call home." Silence. Even the judge looked moved. Camille smiled from her seat. When Marcus stepped down, he didn't feel victorious. He felt clean. Outside, the crowd erupted as he walked down the courthouse steps. Flashes from cameras lit the air. He held up a hand, not in triumph, but in calm. A young boy near the front yelled out, "You're my hero, Mr. Marcus." Marcus turned and gave the boy a small nod. "Be your own," he said. "I'm just one, Nan." That night he sat on his patio once more. The stars were out. Lila called to check on him. Zoe sent a text. "You were brilliant." Camille emailed the full legal transcript. But he ignored them all for a moment. He just sat, hands around a warm mug of tea, and let the stillness hold him. Because for the first time in a long time he didn't feel invisible. He felt real. He felt home. Marcus awoke before the sun, razor in hand, foam spread over his jaw, standing in front of the mirror in his small bathroom. He moved deliberately, the scrape of the blade grounding him in something familiar. The years had etched fine lines around his eyes, but his grip was still steady. After everything, the daily ritual of shaving still gave him a sense of control. As he rinsed his face and reached for the towel, he looked into his reflection and caught something different. His face, usually weathered with restraint, now held something firm beneath the surface. Not defiance, not pride, something quieter, a kind of uncheckable center. He dried his face, folded the towel, and checked his phone. A message waited from Camille. "Judge's preliminary decision expected today. Will call as soon as I hear anything." He didn't reply, just stood there for a long moment in the quiet, letting that old military readiness settle back into his bones. He wasn't expecting a miracle. Lawsuits took time. But he had spoken the truth. Whether the judge heard it, that was something else. The call came just after noon. Camille's voice had a different texture this time, a kind of cautious satisfaction. "We got a partial ruling," she said. He stopped in the middle of his kitchen, hand resting on the back of a chair. "The judge agreed with our claim on Eastgate and Highland. The discrimination counts are going to trial. And as for Dorrance, the court has frozen all evictions across their buildings, pending further investigation. The judge wants more documentation." "So it's not over," Marcus said. "No," Camille replied, "but it's a very big step forward." He let out a breath that had been stuck in his chest all week. It wasn't victory, but it was movement. The next few hours were a blur. The news spread fast. Articles ran headlines like "Judge sides with veteran in housing case," and "Veteran's testimony leads to courtroom shakeup." People began tagging him online again. His face reappeared on television screens. And Zoe, ever timely, sent him a message with a single link. "You're going to want to see this," she said. It was a video. He tapped the link and let it play. At first it was quiet, just ambient piano chords over the familiar scene of him standing outside that brownstone, being turned away. But then came the voiceover. It wasn't his. It was a woman's voice, steady and sure, narrating the facts of his service, his rejections, the documented pattern of exclusion. The screen flashed between real estate data, his interview, and footage of other veterans in uniform. The last shot was of him on the courthouse steps, holding the door open for an elderly woman with a cane. The words faded in white across the black screen. "He defended our home. Now we defend his right to one." Marcus watched it twice, then closed his phone and sat in silence. Not overwhelmed, not proud, just still. Later, Zoe called. "A team of young black filmmakers made it on their own," she said. "They saw your story and ran with it. It's airing in 3 states already." He gave a small laugh. "I didn't think I'd ever trend twice in one lifetime." "You've got more impact than you think." He wasn't so sure about that. But the fact that people were still watching, that meant something. More invitations started to come in. Speaking events, panel discussions, national interviews. He turned most of them down. He didn't want to become a brand. He didn't want to be reduced to a slogan on a T-shirt. What he wanted was quiet. But even quiet had changed. On a walk through the park, he passed a mural that hadn't been there last week. His face was painted on the side of a building, not as a hero, but as a man. No flag, no uniform. Just him, steady-eyed, looking outward. A quote beneath it read, "I just wanted a place to live." He stopped and stared for a while, then kept walking. Camille reached out again. They had obtained internal memos from the leasing offices, redacted names, flagged applications, language that danced around legality. Phrases like, "doesn't fit the profile," "needs to blend in," and one that made Marcus clench his jaw, "black vet optics risk." He said nothing. Camille didn't push. She knew the rage that sat under the surface in moments like that, the quiet kind, the kind trained to stay calm when everything inside screamed. A few days later, Regina Ford called a private meeting. She wanted to propose something new, an initiative that went beyond the lawsuit and the bill she'd passed. A task force to root out housing discrimination across the city, education, investigations, tenant protections. She wanted to name it after him. He raised an eyebrow. "You sure about that? You started this fire. We want you to help keep it burning." He didn't like the attention, but he liked the idea of lasting change. "All right," he said. "But if my name's on it, I'm going to be involved, not just a photo at the press conference." "Deal," she said. On his walk home that evening, he found another note slipped under his door. It was small, no envelope, just torn notebook paper with 5 words scribbled in all caps. "You're making use look bad." He didn't even pause. He threw it into the trash without reading it a second time. He wasn't scared anymore. Days passed, and the case gathered momentum. The public response grew louder, and for every step forward, someone tried to push back. Opinion pieces were published saying his case had been exaggerated, that housing shortages were about income, not race, that he was lucky to get attention when others didn't. He let it all roll off, because behind the noise the truth held. It had weight now. Camille sent him one final piece of evidence before the trial, an email from a building supervisor with the subject line, "Bree Marcus Ellison." The body read simply, "He's the one from the news. We can't rent him. Too much attention." He stared at it for a long time, then said to himself, "Thank you for writing it down." At the VA Center that week, he gave a short talk to a group of young veterans. Most of them were under 30. All of them were dealing with housing insecurity. One asked him, "How do we keep from getting discouraged when no one sees us?" He thought for a moment, then said, "You see each other. That's how it starts. The rest takes time." One morning, a man in a worn jacket stopped Marcus outside the community center. He was quiet, nervous, holding a folder in his hands. "You don't know me," he said, "but I applied to a building you talked about. They turned me away last year. I thought it was just me. Now I know it wasn't." "Thank you." Marcus nodded. "You fighting the case?" The man shook his head. "Didn't think I could," Marcus said. "You still can. It's not too late." He pointed the man toward Camille's office. That night, Marcus received a package on his doorstep. No return address. Inside was a framed photo of him holding the courthouse door open. Someone had written at the bottom, "You didn't just open the door. You held it." He hung it beside the medals. It belonged there. The morning of the trial, the city felt different. The air had that restless tension that hangs before a storm, but the sky was clear. Marcus stood in front of the mirror, fastening the top button of his shirt. He didn't wear a tie. Didn't wear medals either, just the same navy suit he had worn to the hearing. He looked at himself like a man preparing for something far beyond the courtroom. There was no illusion that this trial would fix everything. He knew better, but today wasn't about everything. It was about a line in the sand, a formal declaration that the silence was over. Outside the courthouse, a small crowd had already gathered by the time Marcus arrived. Not protesters this time, supporters. Local residents, veterans, students, even families with children. Someone handed him a small card as he passed. It was handwritten, just one sentence. "You helped people like me feel human again." He folded the card and slipped it into his pocket. Camille met him at the courthouse steps, her expression sharp and composed. "You ready?" she asked. He nodded. Inside, the air was chilled by both the air conditioning and the weight of what was about to happen. The courtroom filled quickly. Press lined the back. Lawyers flanked the defendant's table, whispering and adjusting their suits. Some of the landlords avoided looking at Marcus altogether. One of them, Lawrence, sat stiffly with his arms crossed, jaw tight, like a man who still didn't think he had done anything wrong. The judge entered, the room rose, and the trial began. Camille opened with the kind of clarity that made even the court reporter pause to look up. She laid out the patterns, the documents, the language. Internal communications from leasing agents were presented, highlighting coded phrases and blocked applications. Testimonies from former tenants followed. Black families turned away. Young veterans denied without explanation. People who had kept quiet until they saw Marcus's face on the news and realized they weren't alone. One by one, they told their stories. Each one chipped away at the illusion that this was isolated, coincidental, or merely procedural. When Marcus took the stand, he did not speak like a man trying to win. He spoke like someone testifying to what he knew to be true. "I didn't want attention," he said. "I didn't file complaints or demand headlines. I just wanted a key, a door that opened without suspicion, a lease that didn't require me to be exceptional just to be accepted." He told the court how many times he was turned away, how many polite lies he heard, how many signs still said available after he was told otherwise. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. His calm hurt more than shouting ever could. "You think wearing this uniform protected me?" he asked. "No. The moment I stepped out of it, I became something they didn't want to see. That's the truth I came here to say." There was a stillness in the room when he finished. Even the judge didn't speak right away. Camille thanked him, and he returned to his seat. As he sat down, he felt something shift inside him. Not relief, not victory, but release. For the first time, the weight he carried had been set down in front of others. Whether they picked it up was their burden now. The trial continued with days of cross-examinations and procedural wrangling. The defense leaned heavily on process. They claimed the application denials were based on neutral criteria, that race was never a factor, that Marcus's story was an unfortunate misunderstanding magnified by the media. But Camille dismantled their case with each witness and each document. When one leasing agent tried to deny using racial bias, Camille pulled out a printed email that referred to Marcus by name and labeled him high risk due to media optics. The courtroom tensed. The defense attorney's objection was overruled. The damage was done. On the final day of arguments, Camille delivered a closing that echoed through the walls. This case is not about one man. It's about a system that punishes people for being seen. Mr. Ellison didn't want special treatment. He wanted equal footing. And for that, he was deemed a liability. If this court allows that to stand, then we are all at risk of being measured by the wrong criteria. Not by who we are, but by how uncomfortable we make those in power feel. The judge took the case under review. Marcus exited the courthouse into a sunlit afternoon. The crowd outside cheered, but he didn't raise his hands. He walked calmly down the steps, shoulders squared, as if returning from a mission, not a spotlight. Reporters followed with questions. "Do you feel justice was served today? Do you think you'll win? Would you do it again?" He said only, "I told the truth. The rest is up to the court." That evening, he visited Lila. She had baked cornbread, the kind he liked, and had sweet tea already chilling in the fridge. They didn't talk about the trial at first. They talked about old neighbors, about the new community center in their childhood neighborhood, about the garden she wanted to start on her windowsill. But eventually she looked at him and said, "You changed things, Marcus." He shook his head. The change was already coming. I just refused to get out of its way. She smiled and squeezed his hand. In the days that followed, more people came forward with their stories. One woman, a nurse, described how her rental application was accepted until she showed up in person. Another man, an electrician and father of two, was told he might not be a cultural fit. Camille's team began compiling names. The lawsuit grew. Zoe reached out to tell him a film crew from a documentary series wanted to feature his story. He declined. She respected that. Instead, she asked to write a final feature one that would focus not just on what he'd endured, but what he'd done with it. He agreed, under one condition. Don't make it about a hero. Make it about the fight. She did. A few days later, Gerald, the building manager who had once turned him away, returned to Marcus's apartment, unannounced. Marcus opened the door cautiously. "I just wanted to tell you," Gerald said. "We've changed how we screen applications. Full transparency now. And we're offering free housing seminars to folks who've been turned away before. Doesn't fix the past, but I thought you should know." Marcus didn't invite him in. He only said, "Keep going." Letters still arrived. Most were kind. Some were hateful. One envelope carried a drawing, a child's sketch of Marcus holding a key under a rainbow. Scrawled beside it were the words, "Now you have your home." He taped it to his fridge. Camille called near the end of the week. "No ruling yet, but you should know another judge in another city cited your case in a housing rights ruling. This is already making waves." Marcus didn't react much. Just nodded. Good, let it ripple. The days were quieter now. Not truly peaceful peace didn't come easy to men like him, but steadier, more rooted. When he walked to the corner store, people nodded with respect, not pity. When he stood in line at the pharmacy, someone always offered a chair. At first he resisted, then learned to accept. Respect isn't owed, but when it comes, it ought to be received. One evening he stepped out onto his patio and looked up at the sky. It was purple and orange, streaked with clouds. A neighbor's child waved at him from across the courtyard. He waved back. In that moment, with the scent of fresh-cut grass in the air and the sound of distant laughter somewhere behind him, he didn't feel like a former soldier or a plaintiff in a lawsuit. He didn't feel like a symbol. He felt like what he had always wanted to be, home. The ruling came on a Monday morning. Marcus was pouring coffee, the usual quiet humming through his apartment, when Camille's name flashed across his phone. He stared at the screen for a moment, letting the heat from the mug warm his hands, letting time stretch long enough for a breath. Then he answered. Camille didn't waste time. "We won." Her voice was steady but low, like a field officer delivering news to a soldier who already knew the odds. "The judge ruled in our favor on all claims. Discriminatory practices, biased screening, failure to comply with fair housing laws. Damages are being calculated. They've been ordered to overhaul their application systems, submit to a third-party auditor, and issue formal public apologies." Marcus didn't speak. Not at first. He looked out his window into the soft blue of the morning sky and felt the kind of stillness that comes not with surprise, but with confirmation. He hadn't hoped for it, but he had never stopped expecting it. Camille added, "He also mentioned you by name in the ruling. Said your courage compelled the court to examine not just policy but conscience." Marcus closed his eyes. "Thank you," he said. "No," Camille replied. "Thank you." The headlines came again, this time louder. "Veterans case triggers major housing reform. Landmark decision reshapes rental industry." Cities across the country began citing the case. Legislators pushed new protections. Housing advocacy groups called it a blueprint. Marcus ignored most of it. He wasn't looking for noise anymore. He found himself walking more, staying off screens, visiting the park at quiet hours. Peace had changed shape. It wasn't silence. It was stillness. And stillness was something you had to earn. Zoe came by with a copy of her final article. She had printed it, folded it neatly, and handed it to him like something sacred. He read it at the kitchen table while she sat across from him, drinking tea. It was exactly what he'd asked for. No heroics. No exaggeration. Just the truth. A quiet man who refused to be erased. A system forced to answer for its silence. And a future shaped not by fury, but by firmness. She ended the piece with his words from the trial. "I didn't come here to shame anyone. I came to be heard." He looked up and nodded once. "You got it right." Lila's health had stabilized. She smiled more easily now, moved with less pain. When Marcus visited, she teased him about how the grocery store cashier had asked for a selfie. "You're like one of those neighborhood saints now," she said. "Next thing I know, they'll paint your face on a wall again." He shook his head. "They already did." She grinned. "Good. Maybe now they'll listen when we talk." The Marcus Ellison Initiative passed 2 weeks later. It included funds for veteran housing, mandatory anti-bias training for property managers, and a rotating tenant rights advisory board. Regina Ford called to tell him the vote was unanimous. "They stood when your name was read," she said. "Even the ones who never looked you in the eye before." He said only, "Make it last." She replied, "We will." One afternoon, as spring leaned into summer, a school invited him to speak. Not to college students this time, but to 8th graders. He hesitated, unsure what he could say that they'd understand. But when he arrived, they greeted him like a legend, not for his lawsuit, not even for his service, but for being someone who stood up when it would have been easier to sit down. He told them the truth, that standing up doesn't always look like shouting, that sometimes it looks like walking into a room they don't want you in and asking for what everyone else already has. One boy raised his hand and asked, "How did you not get angry?" Marcus smiled. "Who says I didn't?" Later that week, a city artist delivered a framed portrait. It was based on a photograph of Marcus in his apartment, surrounded by nothing but light, no medals, no uniform, just him. Under it was a brass plate with 3 words, "You belong here." He hung it near the front door, opposite the photo of the courthouse mural and the child's drawing, still taped to his fridge. The final letter came in a plain envelope. No return address. Inside was a check large, from one of the companies named in the lawsuit. There was a typed note attached. "This is not a settlement. This is a contribution to the fund you inspired. No press, no strings. We were wrong." He didn't cash it. He gave it to Camille and told her to split it between housing support programs and the youth center across town. "If it does any good," he said, "let it be where it matters most." That weekend, the neighborhood threw a cookout in his honor. He almost didn't go, but Lila made him. He wore a plain t-shirt and jeans, nothing fancy, no speeches, just hot dogs and folding chairs and music from someone's speaker. A little girl asked him if he was famous. He knelt and said, "Only in this zip code." As dusk settled, he walked back to his apartment slowly, full not just from the food, but from the warmth of being known. Not worshipped, not followed, just seen. That night he sat on the patio with a blanket around his shoulders and a glass of tea in his hand. The sky was wide and full of stars. Somewhere a wind chime rang faintly. The world was still imperfect, still learning, still bending itself slowly toward something better. But for the first time in a long time, Marcus Ellison had nothing more to prove. He was home.